Hello everyone, welcome and thank you for joining the last of our Pride Without Borders Global Mosaic discussions with Reportage today. This session is on the Americas and especially on the Caribbean and South America. For those of you, for those who may be new to us, at Reportage, we're a global human rights charity where we report, inform and defend the human rights of sexual and gender minorities globally. Today's event is one of the three of a series dedicated to exploring the diverse meanings and expressions of pride across different cultures and communities globally. And the event aims at fostering a greater understanding of pride significance worldwide. While hearing about our panelists' different experiences, we delve into personal and contextual interpretation of pride around the world. And we are honored to be joined by our panelists today and to have them share their unique perspectives with us. If I can have our panelist, Kayña, I'm sorry if I'm butchering your name, so you will have to pronounce it for me. And Melissa, can I ask you both to introduce yourselves, please?
Sure. If Melissa wants to go ahead, please.
Sure. So my name is Melissa Gumps. I was born and raised on the island of Sint Marteen, part of the Kingdom of the Netherlands and one of the more unique land masses. We have a French side and we have a Dutch side to the island. I am a second-term member of Parliament of the Parliament of Sint Marteen and the only openly LGBT member of Parliament, and actually the first openly LGBT in our history.
Wow, that's huge. How can I go after this? Well, so hello everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Kayña, but please call me Kai. I'm a gay black man from the ghettos of São Paulo, Brazil, where I grew up. I lead employee communications and employer branding for Latin America at Intel. And besides employee comms, I'm the co-chair of Intel Pride Brazil and the Brazilian leader for NIA, Network of African Ancestry. I also have the coordination of D&I strategies for our region on my plate. So I'm the person who takes care of some stuffs here at Intel Latin America.
Well, I'm very happy to have both of you on this panel. Honestly, I think it's going to be a very interesting conversation. So I'm going to start with some questions that will be to both of you, and then we'll delve into more specific questions to each of you. First of all, I want to ask you what pride means to you and what it is to you, and if you celebrate it personally, and if so, how.
Okay, you want to go? I went first before.
Okay, well, I actually was reflecting on this the whole weekend. For me, I think that pride is like a statement of standing who we are, standing still who we are. And it is, of course, a way to resist all the violence and threats we face daily all around the world. Proud for me means that we are not going back to the closet or pretend to be someone else or hide ourselves anymore. So pride means that to me, because we are who we are, and being LGBT plus, I always say that it is something that shapes how we interact with ourselves, how we interact with the world and life. It actually modifies our visions and give us different perspectives. And I think that our authenticity is one of our main values. And also for me, pride is a bit of this.
Thank you very much.
For me, when I thought about this question, I came up with mainly like three words, that kind of overlap as well with what Kai said. Like, I think pride is a combination of courage, love, and sacrifice. So the bravery and the courage to stand in your authentic self and to live your authentic self each and every day. The sacrifice that may bring with those who may not, get down with you in that sense, but for you still standing 10 toes down on who you are as a person, and the love, for the community, not just the one in where you may be living, but, everywhere. I've been blessed enough to live in different places. And everywhere I go, I'm always embedded in that community, the LGBT plus community of, from a prideful perspective of whether they're at the beginning of their struggle or at the end of it, so to speak, in terms of recognition and acknowledgement and just peace. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. And on these words, I would ask you both, how do Pride events in your regions, and Melissa, for you, in all the regions that you've lived in, differ in terms of scale, participation, and the challenges faced both by organizations and the individuals? And what unique forms of expression and resistance do they exhibit?
Yeah, so I grew up on Sint Marteen, where we did not have much of anything to do with Pride for the majority of my childhood and such. What we would always see was that members of the LGBT community would come out at the most public with their self-expression during Carnival. So it would always be like that is the scene, and you always know that you're going to see, especially our very fashionable gay men, out and about in their carnival costumes, dressing it up and making it their own. And I went to school in Miami, which was a different kind of environment, but still, getting to a point where it was accepted and acceptable to be yourself out there. But it was my first exposure to to ballroom, to clubs and such. And then I lived in the Netherlands, where it's like, Amsterdam Pride is one of the biggest Pride events in the world. So it was overwhelming, but more of I think across the three places that I've lived in, I think, you saw different steps of the fight for LGBT rights and recognition and acceptance. So for Sint Marteen, it's still very fledgling. In the Dutch Kingdom, in the Caribbean part, Curacao has one of the bigger Pride celebrations among the islands. But we are now getting to that point of we have a Pride March, actually our first one on June 29th coming up. So I'm curious to see how that's going to go. And then Miami was kind of in the middle part, and then Amsterdam was just completely at the other end of the spectrum. Like, we're here, we've arrived, we have, marriage, we have rights, we have everything. So we're just, having a party. And I think I've been blessed enough to have that experience of the different stages then of the conversation around LGBT rights and recognition. Yeah.
Thank you. And Kay, what about you?
Wow, I think I think in some aspects Brazil looks a bit like the New York scene, night scene, because we have São Paulo, which is the biggest city of Latin America, and it's really great to see how we created some safe spots in the city and some cities across the country, of course. And like we have an LGBT scene in the nights, and we have some spots dedicated and stuff like that. But it all happened because of intolerance and because we were pushed to create those spaces. Of course, they are important because it's where we can be ourselves fully, but we are pushed to do that. But since the 90s, we created the São Paulo Parade, LGBT Parade, which is the biggest parade in the entire world. This year, we reunited around 4 million people in the Avenida Paulista, which is the main avenue of São Paulo. It is a lot. And we had people, we had families, we had companies supporting. So it is a huge event and a pride event where we can show off and we can be our whole selves. And of course, we fight for rights. We fight for our own. We fight for what we want. And I think this is like a great scenario that we have in Brazil. Of course, this is a bit different from every country in Latin America because everyone has its own context. But in Brazil, we have like a huge scenario, which is great, but we are far, far, far away of what it should be. So, yeah.
And how do you think this visibility affects LGBTQ plus individuals? Like seeing people doing what you wish you could do, what do you think? How do you think it impacts their lives?
I think it is like not an invitation, but it's a message we spread for everyone. Like, look at, we are in the middle of the Paulista Avenue. We are together. You can be with us.
Yeah.
You can be you. Of course, you have to struggle. You have to struggle with your family, with your own beliefs about sexuality, about gender identity, and all stuff like that, because we all go through that. But it's a way that we can spread a message for everyone across the country and across the world that we are doing this. We are not going back, and you can be with us. So join our fight. Come with us. Here you may have a spot you feel secure to be who you are. I think it's a message. And when we talk about politics, it's all symbolic. Every symbol counts. So it is really important.
Yeah. And I think it's the same here, for us. Like, I think since being elected, I've had, especially younger LGBT Sint Martiners message me, whether they're studying abroad in the US or in the Netherlands or so. And they say, I never thought in my time that I would see openly, lesbian member of parliament. And I'm always very comfortable. I'm always like the best dressed. My suits are always, on point and such. And they're like, to see that representation. And I am fully aware of like the magnitude of what I represent for the community that has never, really had that representation. We've had, politicians that we know, like it's like a public secret, but like you said, Kai, like it's still very much in the closet and not a out there kind of here I am representation. So yeah, I think it's interesting to see how now getting the Pride March going and having the community be more outspoken about what they want to see and how they want to be represented. We're now starting that journey for ourselves to see how that's going to work together.
Yeah. And I think that sorry, go ahead.
No, go on, please.
Okay. And I think that it's important to say that even though we have the biggest parade in the world, we have some rights in Brazil, of course, they happened like 5 years ago. They are very recent, very recent. And in Latin America, yes, we are a friendly LGBT country, but we are still the most LGBT phobic country in the entire world. Brazil kills transgender people like every year. Like in 2023, 200 people were brutally assassinated in Brazil. So even though we have the biggest parade, even though we have some rights, we have a lot to do yet. We are not even close to what an ideal should look like. So it's important to point that.
Thank you for that. And Kay, especially, do you think, but also for Melissa, of course, what kind of role do the local organizations have in supporting and organizing Pride on one hand, but also in protecting, for example, trans people or in general, gender and sexual minorities?
Awesome. This is a really good question. I'll try to answer it correctly. But I think that when you talk about rights and diversity and inclusion, we have some pillars. We have the government and society, and what should government be doing for these people? And we have society in general, and our institutional society has, and we have organizations. And organizations, they play a big role in accelerating the chat and pushing governments forward and pushing society forward as well. So organizations, they have also a huge role to play. And that's why when we have Intel, Dell, a lot of huge organizations here in Brazil, Latin America, saying, okay, for me, in my team, in my organization, it's all right to be who you are. You are welcome. We want you to be who you are. We want you to be your whole self. This is the value you add to our teams. We want that. When we have companies big like this, or not so big like this, but when we have companies spreading this message through society, through governments, we are pushing it. We are pushing governments. We are pushing the entire system to saying that, okay, but we agree. We are okay with that. Yeah. What are you doing? So I am a company. I am okay with that. So government, please, what are you doing? What can we do together to push this subject forward? We must accelerate it. We must accelerate this chat. We have advanced. Okay, we have, but we still have a lot to make. So how can we do it? So I think that organizations, they play a really, really important role when we talk about LGBT rights.
Yeah, I agree, especially, and that's where my question for Melissa comes in. you are in the other side. So Kay represents kind of the organizations. I feel like sometimes organizations fill in the gaps that are left by the government. But you, as part of the government, how do you see the organizations, and how do you see yourself in the government to push the rights?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I've actually had the opportunity to also serve before being elected as a board member on SAFE SXM, which is the local LGBT organization. So I've seen as well the struggle that they face in terms of getting funding, getting that type of recognition from government. So now from Parliament, I try to advocate as much for them to be facilitated, like all organizations. I think, NGOs and nonprofits, as you say, fill that gap of what governments can't do. And I've always been a firm advocate that government has to be a facilitator. And with their facilitation, then organizations can actually change, the face of a country and how it works. And the challenge that we have is that the anti-LGBT, they're very well organized, very well funded. And I think that this is a conversation that I've had as well at previous LGBT leadership conferences from countries in the global north, where I say, you guys keep pressuring us about, hey, what are you guys doing for LGBT rights? I'm like, we need money to be able to, push the type of programs that can raise awareness, that can, accomplish that societal mentality shift that has to occur still, for very much of us. Like, we've always had a tolerant society, and to kind of juxtapose it to what Kai mentioned with Brazil, like, even though you have all of these steps in place, there is still a very large margin of the population that is, for us, not as violently anti-LGBT, but it still exists. The main criticism I have as a member of parliament is that, I'm a lesbian sometimes from certain groups on the island, but it's not really on the content of my work, so it's to get people's minds to change when it comes to that. At the end of the day, we're human beings. And a lot of history, if you look at the LGBT and any other struggle really for basic civil rights, it also benefits the wider masses. So it's not just for I have that comparison for like Aruba. Aruba was one of the first to implement civil unions for same-sex couples, and that benefited straight couples as well, because there was no construction for them to solidify their union, basically, even though you were together for X amount of years and you just didn't want to get married. So I think I always try to also relate how at the end of the day it is a human struggle, and that is what I think the focus needs to be on. But our organizations play a large role in that, and our companies are now kind of getting on board. One of our banks is flying the pride flag for like about 3 years now. And at first, I was driving when I first saw it, and I almost drove off the road like, oh, because you don't expect it. So I'm happy to see that even the local companies are also now getting on board with that, with pride in general.
Yes, and I think it's extremely important, but also we need to kind of make sure we keep out rainbow washing the whole thing, because sometimes, especially here in, for example, I'm from Europe, and wherever I go, we always talk about Pride, especially in June or August, because I'm currently living in Denmark, and apparently Pride Month is in August. And I think a lot of organizations here, for example, they tend to kind of rainbow wash it, rather than actually implementing those rights. They do it because they know they're supposed to be doing it, basically, for a matter of politically correctness and kind of their visibility rather than the visibility of the minorities. Do you think in both Brazil and Curacao, is it like this, or do you think it's more heartfelt, let's say?
I think this is a really good question, very polemic, and it has like many answers for that. I think there always will be companies that take advantage at some subjects. There is in Brazil, there is in the US, Europe, Latin America, and every country has it. But I think also that we have some companies. I'll talk about my role in Intel and the tech companies because it's the world I live in. But I have the privilege to work in a company that I actually see action. That I actually see the walk, the talk, right? I think that is really important to point as well that diversity and inclusion is the correct thing to do. You know, we should reflect the society we are in. If we have 10% of LGBT people in our society, it should be 10% of people in the company. That's a simple count that we do in all the countries. And also, I think that diversity and inclusion is the right thing to do, but also it has its benefits. You know, diversity and inclusion drives more innovation. Diverse teams, they are more engaged, they are more friendly, they are more open, they are more creative. So it drives also the business of every company in all of the world. So it's a win-win, you know, we win, people win. So it's a good thing to do. But I think that the most important thing is walk the talk. And I see this happening at Intel. I see this happening in some tech companies because I can share some examples that IBM was one of the first companies that created ERG, employee resource groups, for LGBT people in the 90s. After them, Microsoft, Intel created the Intel Pride in 1985, if I'm not mistaken. So we are talking about it like 30 years now. Intel in 2015 invested $300 million in diversity in the ecosystem and in the company, because we wanted to, okay, we are doing this and we are really doing this. So we must engage ourselves, our workforce, but also our ecosystem. You know, we must accelerate this subject. We must accelerate what we are doing, and we must walk the talk. And I think that is the most important. There's some companies, they are not doing this. They are not walking the talk because of, we can point a lot of stuff because they are not doing this. But when we look for companies that are actually doing this, I think they are walking the talk, and I think that is important. They are unideal? No, they aren't. There will always have something new. There's something to implement. There's something to accelerate. But we aren't on the path, and I think that's really important to point out too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
If you could repeat the question for me.
If in the Caribbeans, or I mean, in the Caribbeans, there is such a high risk for rainbow washing as there is, for example, in Europe, where everyone puts up the flag just because, basically, just because they know they have to do it.
Yeah. I think on Sint Marteen we also have had that in the past, because you know we as a heavily dependent on tourism country, you know, we have cruise tourism, and I know like in our shopping areas they would always put a little rainbow flag in the window when they knew that there were cruises coming with a high passenger capacity of LGBT people. But I think now, especially since you've had in even those strict communities, because you know Sint Marteen is a melting pot, so we have very big Indian communities, Arabic communities and such. And I think now, as their younger generations are kind of coming out and being more confident in being themselves and being who they are, it's shifted from, well, I'm just trying to capture the capitalist part of this, to I'm definitely more supportive, you know, of the demographic and in general. So I think, you know, especially in the instance of like the bank, and now we've had like the local Heineken branch also making a post about how they celebrate the diversity of their workforce and of Heineken in general worldwide. You know, I think it's definitely more genuine than it has been in the past. And I appreciate that, you know, where I worked, I previously, years ago, worked for one of our resorts. And I see them even actively targeting then, you know, the LGBT travel market. Whereas it came to a point where when I worked there, we never did, because you'd have certain staff like housekeeping and such refusing to even clean the rooms of guests that they knew were LGBT. And now to see it like be an active thing where it's like, no guys, like everyone is welcome, everyone is appreciated. There are certain nightlife establishments that also are very open to having LGBT parties. One has like every Thursday, it's fixed for the community that we can go there, and it's a safe space for us to just gather and dance and just have fun. So definitely seeing that shift and seeing the support become more genuine over time and less, you're still after what's in my wallet, but it's also you're happy to have me here. So I think that's a good conclusion that we've come to. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that contribution. And actually, you kind of answered to my following question, which was, how do you feel about the effect of capitalism on pride, and how you see it in your countries and cities, especially during Pride event? How does the city change in that month?
Yeah, I don't know if Kai wants to go first. It's also like, you want to go first?
Go ahead.
Okay. Now, so because we haven't really had Pride events, I don't really have I don't have an example of that on Sint Marteen. But when I lived in the Netherlands, if I look at Amsterdam Pride, it's definitely gotten to be so capitalistic. I participated in the canal parade once on the boats, and it's come to a point where now a lot of people on the boats are not even LGBT. It's just that companies sponsor a boat and they're just like, hey, you want to go on the boat? And it's not indicative of the community itself. So the last few years I lived there, I just kind of skipped the parade and just went to specific bars, in the Reguliers Dwarsstraat, which is predominantly LGBT or businesses and such in Amsterdam on that street. And there were a couple Black and brown owned businesses as well that I definitely, wanted to patronize, from Caribbean people, and those from the global south. So I stayed away from the hyper capitalism of what the parade itself has become. And I do think that it is a struggle to see. Not surprising, but I definitely see it. On St. Martin, I hope it doesn't turn into that, but we'll see. Give us a couple of years and then we'll follow up.
Well, I really like this question because my conclusion paper from university was something about diversity and capitalism, blah, blah, blah. So I think that, okay, capitalism is the system we are living in. Okay, there's no excuse. This is how it is. But since Anu created the, I will not know in English, but Global Pact, I think it's Global Pact. Since Honor curated that, after that, there's an author, I will not remember his name right now, but he was the founder of some huge bank, global bank, and blah, blah, blah. And she wrote a book about shareholders capitalism. And shareholders capitalism is basically something that relates to when you put people, environment first in the business, and everything else goes behind it. Basically, it's a way of doing businesses that are not so aggressive. Or, by the way, like instead of you aiming for sharing and stocks and blah, 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 you can see capitalism in a more human way. Yeah. And when you saw that change, we had ONU, Global Impact, several companies going on board and stuff like that. And we created a new, not so new, but a new way of thinking about businesses and thinking about how the environment is important, how sustainability is important, how diversity and inclusion is important for the living of a business as well. Because every business is made by people. There's people behind, there's people making decisions. So what are we doing with our people? Is there the stocks more important or people? So people is the choice. So we have a lot of companies around the world that are on board of this. The sign actually the global impact, the global pact with ONU. And this means that when we talk about diversity and inclusion, about capitalism and about companies, everything is linked. Everything is some kind going on together, because they are part of the same thing. We are talking about people. So we must see and put people first. That's why I think that, of course, there's no way I think today that companies, capitalism and diversity and inclusion are not going together. This is how it is, and this is how we work. So we must extract the good things about it. We must accelerate. We must, do more.
Thank you for that. Going back to the parades, the actual parades of Pride, what do you think? What do you think it's the impact on LGBTQ plus people, especially when even allies participate? And is it normal for allies to participate?
No, I can go first. I think that when you talk about LGBT community, we are not doing it alone.
Mhm.
We must have allies. And allies, they can be our family, our friends, our company, our businesses, people. People are aligned to us because somehow the allies, they can somehow spread the message that, okay, everything's okay. We can do it together because, they play a huge role in our lives. When you have your family by your side, when you have your friends by your side, you have more strength to fight. You have more strength to be who you are. So the allies, they are one of the most important parts of being LGBT. And in the parades, of course, they are really important. It is actually amazing that they participate, okay? It is, of course, a parade for LGBT people, for claiming for rights, but allies, they are there too. They are there also saying, okay, I agree with that. I am with them, and they have my support. I will also fight against discrimination. I will also fight for rights. And I think this is the most important part of allies, and they play seriously a huge role when we come to fight for rights, and just creating a secure environment for us to be who we are. This is really important.
Yeah, no, allies I think are in any struggle, they are the most important element, because they kind of, as you say, they give you that additional boost, that additional strength to continue to fight, to argue, because it's exhausting, having to be on that type of time all the time. It's tiring. And I think that they add that little extra that keeps you going. Their energy, just contributes to yours. And I think their participation matters, because a lot of times when people see LGBT people in a parade or whatever, it's like, oh, well, of course you'll be there. But when they see others, straight allies or whatever in the parades, in the gatherings, in the parties, it also lends a certain type of, okay, so this is cool. I can do that. Like, on my political party, which is a party that I started myself, all our candidates are also allies. Most of them are straight. So, but they will definitely argue with people who are anti-LGBT or who are saying negative things. And it brings that shift, because they also bring a different message of, this is just about humanity and about having, the basic rights that everyone else is afforded. So it changes the conversation, and I think allies are most important to that. When it comes to shifting certain mentalities from where they are at to being more supportive and more inclusive. Definitely.
Yeah, I totally agree. And what do you think about governments getting intruded, let's say, quote unquote, into Pride? As in, should government be supervising or regulating it, or do you think that Pride can be, like the parade itself, be free?
I have two. So I have an example then of government getting involved. So for us on Sint Marteen, the government is not really involved. They do not give funding or anything like that to any LGBT projects or events or so. But when I look at how Amsterdam Pride is carried out, it's very, very well regulated. The Dutch in general are good at just bureaucracy. So it's, you know, how I recall it being structured, because I also volunteered to help plan lesbian and bisexual women pride-focused events when I lived there. You know, it goes out for bid and foundations have to come and they have to present a plan. You know, what type of events are you going to have? And I was lucky enough to volunteer at a time when the city decided that it needed to be a very diverse pride. They were tired of it just being predominantly, you know, older white gay men organizing and executing events for pride. And it just completely shifted, you know, and I participated with a group where I helped plan a night, you know, with a group that used to do this spoken word lesbian event called Cinnamon Wednesdays. And we planned several events, you know, around, you know, particularly those descending from the diaspora. So you had all types of people there from the islands in the kingdom, from Jamaica, from Brazil, from Argentina, etc., who lived in the Netherlands, and they came out. And that, I think, was a turning point for Amsterdam Pride. It made it very diverse. It made it very inclusive. And that is an example of good regulation by the city government. Can it go the opposite direction? Most definitely. And I think that's the risk you take whenever government is involved in anything. It really depends who's sitting there and what their vision is for whether it's pride or whether it's anything really. And I think that it's, yeah, on the one hand, it can be good because it kind of pushed and forced that diversity and that inclusiveness. But on the other hand, of course, if it shifts in the future, we don't know where it's going to swing to. So yeah, I'm a cautious supporter of governments being involved in pride-related events. Yeah.
I think Melissa is the right person to answer the question. Because as long as I know, in Brazil also, there's no government involved. Of course, government is responsible for providing security, for providing a safe spot, and blah, 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 stuff like that. But actually involved in the organization of the parade or regulamentating it, I don't think so, but Melissa is the right person. Definitely.
Thank you. And since both countries are very rich in cultural traditions, how do you think these traditions impact Pride celebration and influence them? This might be especially for Kate, since we still don't know what's going to happen on the 29th of June.
Yeah.
But for you, how would you, Melissa, how would you think that they might influence?
It will be difficult. It'll be tough, you know, and maybe we're like not really going off topic, but I think that especially for the Caribbean and also, I mean, for South America, there is still this further discussion of decolonization from our history, our culture, you know, our heritage, basically. And a lot of the anti-LGBT sentiment is actually remnants of colonialism. And so that's the last part of the conversation that we also have to push on Sint Marteen, to discuss the fact that decolonization is also breaking free of these systems that were imposed upon our ancestors to say that, you know, being LGBT was bad, you know, and I'm always fighting that particular discussion. You know, we have a very strong Christian community, very heavily Methodist, Catholic, you know, and Baptist. And so those are usually the Christian Council is usually the more anti-LGBT front. You know, there was a time where we had a gay cruise coming in and they hosted a protest, and yeah. So that, I think, is going to be the sentiment. We also have had an influx, and I don't know if it's, maybe Kai can share if it's the same in Brazil, an influx of what I call conservative American evangelism that has kind of infected the Caribbean region. And it's, even in the more tolerable islands, it's kind of trying to drag the pendulum back to very heavily anti-LGBT. So that's the sort of, that's the group that I'm kind of watching to see how it's gonna go on the 29th. But overall, it's been, you know, there's been good reception so far to the announcement. I mean, there's always gonna be a few comments from people that are a little crazy, but generally from the allies that we can count in the community, it's been positive. So that's what I'm seeing is going to be our biggest resistor in that particular discussion. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's the same for Brazil, like there will always be people that are against or anti-LGBT. And I think that the problem nowadays is that I have seen the rise, not the rise, but kind of the rise of intolerance around the world. Actually, intolerance never stopped, but I think that now we are seeing some people feeling more encouraged
Yes.
to show off their hate and discrimination. And I think this is not only in Brazil or Sint Marteen, but all over the world. So
Mhm.
I think there is some forces that are trying to push us back or to suffocate it, but we are still trying to thrive, and I think that that is really important because, and of course, that's why the allies are so important. That's why the companies are so important, the organizations, institutions like Report Out, this whole tools we have across society, they are so important so we will not be suffocating about this conservative thought. So I think that is basically the same. We are all in Latin America, we are very similar.
Yeah.
I get it. Thank you. Melissa, you're stealing my questions before I ask them. Because I wanted to ask about the impact of colonialism.
Oh.
Because from what I know nothing, but from what I know, from the most basic stuff I know, is that colonialism was the one that brought, in a lot of countries, the anti-LGBT key plus sentiment. And I was wondering, how do you address it, if you are addressing it, and in both countries, and if especially now that anti-colonialism is being discussed so much, do you think that, for example, in schools and in the education system, it is being addressed enough in a way that involves pride?
No, it can be better. I wouldn't say that the schools are discussing it. I think that's a conversation that happens outside of formal education establishments, even for adults, like at a university level, the conversation happens in bars and cafes and when we, randomly gather. And I've also, I try to mention it as often as I can. We had in 2020, I think it was 2022, December 2022, we had the apology for slavery by the Dutch government, of which we are still very much interacting with because we are a constituent country within the Kingdom of the Netherlands. And in my remarks, so we were asked to react to the apology. And in my remarks, I said, that the discussion of decolonization is not just something that it is a responsibility of the colonizer. It is also a responsibility of the colonized to talk about and examine the systems that have been left behind and that were instilled in our ancestors and that have trickled down. And one of those is homophobia. There are enough readings, there are enough of what could be found, texts and historical texts and artifacts and concepts that show that, pre-colonial societies everywhere had LGBT persons in their tribes, in their groups, in whatever you want to call it, from Native Americans right over to Africa, right down to the indigenous people that we had, whether it was Arawaks or Kalinago or Taino or whatever, it was there. And I think that their eradication kind of wiped that out. But whoever is a descendant and whatever has been found through archaeology, through historical research, it can already be proven that LGBT persons, especially the reverence that certain groups had for even transgender people, from Native Americans calling them two-spirited or whatever term was used, the proof is in the pudding, basically. And I think sometimes when I provide it to people, they're always like, huh, I had no idea. I'm like, yeah. And it's always hurtful, of course, that now the colonizers are kind of doing away with their own ancient laws that are anti-LGBT, and we're still kind of holding on to it like, no, and I think that is also just a sort of a remnant of indoctrination, and it's unfortunate. But I stress in my capacity that conversation has to continue. It has to always be at the forefront. you know, and a thing that I like to always end my posts or my commentary about is that, you know, homophobia is colonialism, and decolonization is not just a constitutional status. You know, becoming independent from your colonizer does not mean that you have shaken off colonialism. And that's I think the angle that I try to always present it from. And it's a tough conversation, but more and more, you know, I think people are willing to have it, as you said, as this discussion of anti-colonialism continues to, you know, carry on.
It is, it
Thank you.
is. Perfect. It is a tough conversation, and I think Melissa will agree that some people are talking more about it. Like I think that I feel in Brazil that people are like, oh, I think that this is some effects of colonialism. What is going on in Brazil right now? I think it happened when back in, I don't know, 5,000 years ago. So yeah, I think we are Latino.
Yeah.
And how do you think, since both countries are very racially diverse, how do you think this intersection between being LGBTQ plus and belonging to a racial minority can affect Pride, it can show in Pride?
A really, really good question. I will try to connect. But in Brazil, we have many ethical kinds. And I think that when you talk about intersectionality, I used to say that it's like exponential. So if you are a gay man, okay, you will suffer homophobia. If you are a gay man and black man, you will scale. If you are a woman, a black woman, a lesbian, or a transgender black woman, it will scale to 100%. Like,
Yeah.
As you have more marks, identity marks, or sexual marks, etc., it will get higher rates of hate, basically. So as much marks you have, more exposed to violence you are. And of course, this affects and changes all the conversation because it's not only important that we are talking about, okay, you are free to be who you are free to be gay, but how about the other people? How about their intersectionalities?
Yeah.
How about indigenous people in Brazil? Is like a subject, a really tough subject. We talk about this everywhere because it's really tough. It's really sensible. So I think that it affects totally pride. It affects everything. It affects all the politics we are thinking about, all everything. It changes all the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I agree 100%, you know, and do we feel it in St. Martin like that? Not necessarily. However, definitely if you are an effeminate gay man, you will face all types of bullying, etc. It has improved slightly with, of course, growing allyship amongst, in particular, the typical macho, persona of straight men, you know, who are then stepping in to defend their gay friends, cousins, brothers, etc. When you are a femme-presenting woman, it's easier, of course, who's a lesbian or bisexual. As a masculine presenting woman, though, it can be tough. I have heard personally stories of women being fired from their job or so because they were mass presenting and their boss doesn't get down with that or so. And I think that that's also a touch of misogyny because, of course, if you're femme presenting, then you kind of unwittingly and unknowingly pay into the male gaze idea of what is brought up with two hot lesbians, you know, kissing or so. That remains a challenge. And I also see that a lot of times as a mass presenting woman, I'm also kind of targeted by men who think that I participate in their misogyny, which is very interesting to me as a you know, that weird intersection of, well, what is masculinity, and are you going to represent positive sides of it, or are you going to represent the negative toxic sides of it? Which I have different conversations also with other mass presenting lesbians about that. So it's always interesting to witness, but definitely what Kai said, the more markers you have that, identify you as whatever, definitely the hate scales and the bullying scales. So that's something that, is an ongoing conversation as well for ourselves internally, because no one can fix that but us,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. I have only a couple of questions more, actually. Hopefully, we'll wrap it up before Kay has to leave. In what ways does the movement in both Brazil and the Caribbean collaborate with other international organizations and is connected to the global movement itself?
This is a really good question. I wish Lucas was here because he was the perfect answering, but I will try to do my best. But I think that we are collaborating a lot because I don't know in San Martin, but in Brazil and Latin America in general, we don't have government data about LGBTQ population. They are kind of fake. They are not good. They don't represent the reality. So the institutions we have, like Machises, Instituto Machises, and several others, they play a huge role by mapping our population, mapping our families, mapping our marriages, mapping everything related to who you are, how you interact with your work, with your jobs. So they play a huge role trying to create an image that represents more close to the truth what LGBT community reflects in the country, in the region, in the continent. So it plays a big role when we are collaborating to other institutions, because also we are sharing our data and people, look, this is who we are, come on, let's talk how we can do it. But also because the institutions that has more advanced laws, rights, they can also share with us the conquers, how they do it. We call BKM and Intel, that is best known method. Some things that we can repeat, that we can do here, that we can tropicalize for Brazil, for Latin America. So I think these partnerships, they are really important for the continuation of the work that our institutions do in their countries. Like this is really, really important. Like Reportout, Out and Equal, Human Rights Campaign, like this is really huge for us. It's a really important collaboration.
Yeah. In St. Martin, it's a bit of a struggle because a lot of times when SAFE would approach international organizations and such, whether it was for specific funding requests for projects or anything like that, you kind of get told, well, you're in the Kingdom of the Netherlands, so you should be rolling in the money. The problem is that, we're not. So it's because we're a constituent country, we're responsible for these things on our own. So there is actually internally not much access to funding that can be gained within the kingdom. So we have a relationship with other organizations. For example, just last October, we had a women's conference from ECADE, which is an Eastern Caribbean, predominantly queer organization based in St. Lucia. And then they work with, I believe, Outright International and other organizations to put on these types of awareness campaigns, conferences, etc. But we can't get access to them in that sense. So we have to partner up with whatever is available regionally, which is something that they have been working on at SAFE to kind of expand that reach to the other islands and to the rest of the global south to see how we can kind of gain support in that sense. So, but me personally, I try to keep touch with not just Dutch organizations that push for LGBT rights internationally, but also for US and Canada-based organizations that can maybe kind of see past the whole "well, you're in the kingdom" kind of thing and help SAFE to continue to grow its presence on the island and its activity.
And I think also that when you have this kind of partnership, we can also map globally. And I think this is really important because if you go Google something there won't be a lot of data about LGBT around the world.
Yeah.
There won't. So the role of these institutions in mapping it globally also is really important for us because we can see, okay, Asia is doing like that, America like that, Africa like this, Oceania like that. So this is really important.
Yeah.
This might be a hard question to answer, but this just came up to me. But do you think that these kind of partnerships, I believe they have positive of partnerships might and collaboration recolonize the whole situation and kind of push you towards the global trend rather than allow people to express pride as they would um, in the different countries?
That's a great question. That's a great question. And I think the risk is always there. But I also believe that it depends on who is who's the driving force behind the local organization. So when I went to when that conference happened on St. Martin from ECADE, it was still a very Caribbean conference, even though their primary funder is Canada-based. I think that for me, I felt like, yeah, this is queer Caribbean representation as I've never experienced it. So it left a lasting impact on me, to be around women from Barbados, from Trinidad, from Jamaica, from Suriname and such, in that type of environment. And even though there was some representation from the funder, from Canada, and from Washington, D.C., ultimately, it was still just a Caribbean gathering. We invoked our ancestors. There were very spiritual Afro-Caribbean spiritual practices being done throughout the conference. So I did not feel like this was a recolonization, so to speak, because everyone is kind of left to represent and express, as you feel, for yourself, from our background and from our shared history. In the Caribbean. So yeah, I think that the risk is always there, but if persons in these local organizations kind of stay true to themselves and remain authentic, then you can always resist that influence.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Totally.
Perfect. And this was actually my last question. I have one more that is more of what do you hope for Pride this year? To wrap it up in a positive note.
I don't know, Melissa, because your Pride is still happening.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm hoping that it will be a big step towards reviving the conversation around LGBT rights for St. Martin, but also for the part of the Northeastern Caribbean that we occupy, and I think I'm hoping that it will do that. I'm hoping that it will also bring out our allies and encourage them to be more vocal, because a lot of times when I describe what life is like, especially for LGBT youth on the island, most of people that I count as allies are surprised. They're like, what? I'm like, yeah. I said, being an ally is not just kind of waving the flag every June. It's also being aware with what's happening in the community on a daily basis. How are things shifting? How are attitudes changing? From our schools right on up to our highest levels of government. So I think I'm hoping that it will be kind of a jumpstart for that conversation to begin again and to continue even stronger and to be maintained as a conversation. Yeah.
Well, my Pride is just getting to an end, but for the rest of the year and the years to come, I hope that we have much more allies as we can have, much more organizations, much more people engaged in this fight. I think this is really, really important. And I really hope that companies, institutions, allies, that they don't feel pressured to go back, even though we have this wave of intolerance resurgent. I hope that they resist as allies, as company supporters, and don't go back. Just don't go back. We are where we are, and we have much more to do. So let's keep doing. We must not have we must not be afraid, you know. We must not
Yeah.
be afraid. We must keep going. Threats there will always be. Of course, we must we must be safe always, but let's not go back. This is what I hope.
Thank you very much for both of your contributions. It's
Thank you.
I really hope the best and what you said as well. And very, very, very good luck for Pride and happy Pride.
Thank you.
Yes.
Happy Pride.
Happy Pride, everyone. Nice to
Yeah.
meet you all.
Likewise.
Thank you. Lauren?